The TRC is about addressing the harm that's happened in Canada's history and finding ways to be truthful and to create spaces to hear the things that happen to Indigenous populations in this country, and I think starting to drive at the question of why did those things happen.
TRC is about two things, I think. Specifically, it's about residential schools and Canadian society and Indigenous peoples finding hope and reconciliation out of this traumatic piece of history that still affects us today. But broadly speaking, it's about colonialism, past and present. Us grappling, those of us within the dominant society, with what Indigenous peoples have endured for 150 plus years in Canada, and us finding a new way of relating to one another for the future.
This is about truth and reconciliation, two things that we as Christ followers hold so dearly. And we need to hear the truth of these stories and what happened, even though it might put us on edge, even though it might be hard to hear. And as a pastor, I know that one of the things I do most often is I go out for coffee with people and they want to tell me their story because they believe that by telling me their story, they're not looking for all the answers, but it helps in their healing journey, right? And I'm like, if we are a priest of all nations, if we can go out and hear people's stories, show them respect and honor and the faithfulness of Christ to go and hear their stories and help their healing, why wouldn't we do that?
This is really difficult for me to say because it took a long time for me to remember that I was molested, and I have no identity of my perpetrator because it would happen at night in a dorm. My mom also went to residential school, and she was there when the nuns would hit her, and she had such pain she couldn't deal with that, and she was in alcohol and drugs, and I saw that the child growing up, but I know where her pain comes from, and dealing with it has been the hardest road, and trying to heal myself.
I lived with the anger for 20 years. I'm perpetually an angry man. I hate that. I hate the fact that I have hate in my heart, that I wake up every day. I hate the fact that I wake up every day and know that my mother never got justice.
The thing that is difficult for me to know is who do I forgive? Some entity that's out there, and how do I do that? And not even today, I'm struggling with that. So I'm stuck at that point, knowing that I must forgive if I want to go forth, on my healing journey to become whole again. And I don't know the answer to that yet.
A lot of Mennonites are aware that Catholic, United Church, Anglican, and Presbyterian were involved in the residential school system. What many of us Mennonites don't know is that we were actually involved as well in the residential schools, in the day schools and boarding school, the Indian education system. And it goes back all the way to 1880s. In the US, in the Indian Territory, we had 3 residential schools there, and we had schools in Kansas. We had 3 schools in northwestern Ontario. Now, these weren't maybe specific to Mennonite Church Canada institution, but they were part of the Mennonite family. Mennonite Church Canada had 2 day schools in Manitoba. There were 3 Haldeman schools in Alberta.
The story of us as Mennonites who haven't, at least in BC, and many of us haven't been involved in residential schools at all, but at the same time have been the beneficiaries of the problem, in that when we Mennonites were invited to come to BC, that we were invited to come farm on this wonderful new land that was discovered. And I think in many ways we didn't ask the question that how was this land discovered? Why was it not known before? And I realized that as Sumas Lake had been drained, it was a place where the First Nations people were gaining their livelihood through hunting and fishing and living. And as a result of that, many of them did end up at St. Mary's Residential School, and so then we became the beneficiaries of the system that put these people into residential schools and all of that tragedy that happened after that.
The residential schools helped to remove the Aboriginal people from the area, and so we were able to take it, farm it, and benefit from it, and it increased in value. And I personally benefited because when my dad's estate was settled, there was money there for me to begin and to establish my own investments and so on. And so I benefited from the fact that my dad had land and was able to farm it, and it increased in value.
The spirit of what I've encountered, I might cry, because it's so open. It's not joyous, but it's real.
If you're a survivor, a child of a survivor, a grandchild of a survivor, a great-grandchild of a survivor, you are affected. I'm a wife, a mother, and a homemaker. I have 5 children. As a child of a survivor, it hasn't been easy. The people who ran these schools were not in any way, shape, or form representing who my God is. God's kingdom was about justice and freedom. It wasn't about what these nuns and these priests brought to our people. They were wrong. Thank you.
Certainly my family history, my grandfather, my mom's oldest brother, they were taken off to concentration camps in Siberia and never came back again. So there's a lot of history and brokenness in our culture, in our history as Mennonites, in my family. And so I've reflected on this question of how was it that my parents and their friends and their family were able to continue on. And one of the experiences I had was hearing stories of person after person saying, I was taken to school, I was in a community, and the first thing I was told is you can't speak your language, you're no longer Indian, you're now a white person, this is who you should become, you forget your history. And I realized the big difference between my community and the First Nations community is we're able to continue to speak our language, we're able to work together, our families were intact even though some were taken away. Whereas the First Nations communities, if you're told your language is no good, that your culture is evil, it just changes everything. So there's this whole sense of cultural genocide. There's something there that's been taken away that wasn't taken away from our people.
I hear a lot of people saying about why can't people just get over boarding schools? Missionary boarding schools existed as well, and my wife Judy went to missionary boarding school. The difference with that, though, is that her culture and her faith were strongly supported at boarding school. That was not true for residential schools for Aboriginal children. It was an entirely different culture, and it was not a supportive environment. It was an abusive environment for the most part. And so there's a great difference. So it's really unfair for us to say, well, you went to boarding school, I went to boarding school, Aboriginals just ought to get over it. It's an entirely different world, and it's an entirely different issue.
People who are in the room, those who are standing up as the Idle No More movement, those who are standing up and asserting their need to understand why things are the way they are, and that whatever it is that's caused the events of today to be what they are, things need to change. And our job today, as members of this generation, is to try to lay the groundwork, to try to make things easier, the conversation better, so that when they come along in those positions of leadership, both Aboriginal leaders as well as non-Aboriginal leaders of the future, that they will be able to bring more positive energy.
I think the connection with the Idle No More movement and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is, I think it's evidence of a new society of people, our young adults, primarily young adults, youth, that are not willing just to allow things to be quiet anymore, or to allow things to carry on as they have been. They're demanding a more equitable system, and they're demanding a more global justice.
It gives me hope with the Idle No More. Beginning with younger people, beginning with the women. They're saying we need to do something. We can't just sit by and let things happen. And also, we're going to begin to make changes on our own. We're going to speak up for a change in policy, a change in our own structure, and so taking ownership of their own lives. There's something about that in the TRC as well, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that people are taking ownership of their story and then saying, how do we move forward?
When it comes to truth and reconciliation, I think the example that we have in the Bible of Jesus was all about truth and reconciliation, reconciling peoples that were at odds with each other, to cut beneath the religious systems of the time and seek the truth, and to increase the reconciliation with our Creator and increase the reconciliation with one another.
I believe Jesus would have something to say about the impact of an imperial power occupying a land that wasn't their own initially. And those stories are familiar to us.
As someone who follows Jesus, there's a devastating narrative that has unfolded in Canada by the actions of certain missionaries. They really did get this picture of God that was harmful and violent and terrible and heartbreaking.
I think Jesus would want us to tell the truth about our role as the church in destroying lives, which is the height of irony that the Lord of Life and the Prince of Peace, his followers, could be in any way responsible for the devastation that we see in these kids. Like, to hear about kids being taken from their families, and in the name of Jesus, it boggles the mind and it breaks the heart.
I'm a residential school survivor. One of the things I think that has to be done is that the people who are not Aboriginal, who are hearing these things have to rise up and listen to what's being said so that it'll never happen again.
Here's an opportunity that's Indigenous-led, initiated, where they're saying, come, hear us, be with us. We want to find a way together. It's remarkable. It's actually them extending the olive branch to us. What would it look like if Jesus was one of the honorary witnesses, if he was in this place? I see him, and I see him as one of the survivors. I hear the voice of Jesus in older Indigenous women who are telling their stories of strength, of hope, even though they've been damaged in incredible ways. Their communities have been damaged, and they're saying, come, be with us. Join hands with us. We need healing. You need healing. And how can we do this together?